Going to put our lower unit back on now. One of the key things is to grease your bolts. Always grease the threads on them. The grease is to seal the threads. It's not to lubricate. It does make it easier to come apart, but the objective of the grease is to seal the threads from any salt water or fresh water, but from any water getting up in there. In this case, it's a saltwater boat. You don't want the salt water getting into your threads. It'll cause corrosion. You won't be able to get your bolts out. So grease all the threads on all your bolts. I've done all of them except for that one. I just thought I'd do that and show you there. So now we'll just, the control is in neutral. We'll make sure that the lower unit is in neutral. Sometimes they will slide out of neutral while they're out of gear. So, to make sure that we're in neutral, we just need to be able to make sure that we can, where's that drive shaft? There we go. You want to be able to turn your drive shaft there. If it was in gear, or the prop shaft, if it was in gear, the propeller shaft up here would be turning when I'm turning the drive shaft, or when I'm turning the prop shaft. But the drive shaft's not turning, so I'm in neutral. And the control up forward is in neutral, so. The shift is controlled by this spline. If you're in gear here and in neutral there, you'll engage it in the wrong spline and you won't have forward and reverse properly. So we'll just slide this right back up into the hole it came out of. Again, the reverse of taking it apart, you don't want to hang the weight on your drive shaft. You don't want to bend it. There is a support bushing here up in your housing that runs on the drive shaft that helps support it. Work it up in there. Our pitot tube here, we want to make sure that we feed that up through the hole so that we can connect that. Now that's our splines touching. So we need to twist it a little bit just to line up the splines. There we go. And now this is where it gets really tricky. And I don't even think I can get the camera down here to show you. But you need to line up the shift shaft as well. It's right up in here. How could I do that? I'm not even going to be able to get in there to show you. All I can do is tell you that you need to make sure that your shift engages properly here. And while you're sliding it up, I'm looking from this side, but if you look from here up into there, while you're sliding it up, you can see that you're engaging the water pickup tube into the water pump. If you can't push your drive all the way up by hand to close that gap up, something's not right, and stop and work out what you're hitting on. So some of these Yamahas, if you've caught your shift shaft incorrectly, you'll push it up through the bottom of the crankcase and have a nasty, nasty oil leak. You want to make sure it slides all the way up. So this hole here, let's just support that. We'll take the camera out and show you the details. So that hole there lines up with this tube here, which is up in the dark there. Not sure if you can see that, but there's a tube there. And then down lower here, this one here, that's our shift shaft. And you see how it flops around a little bit? It has to align with this one here. So that's what I was fiddling with underneath there to line it all up. So we'll just go through that whole exercise once more here. But now that everything's lined up, it should be pretty simple. So I'm straight into my splines there, and I'm just lining up my shift shaft. Not quite on my splines, am I? There we go. And my shift shaft is good. And I will visually make sure I'm on my water pickup tube. And there we go. Closed up the gap. I know that my my lower unit's all connected up properly and nothing's bound up. And too many people have tried to pull their lower units up using the bolts and caused all sorts of damage, very expensive damage. So always make sure you can push it up all the way by hand. If not, something's in the way and you need to identify what it is. It's going to be either your shift shaft, the splines on your drive shaft, or your water pump pickup. You've got dowel pins in there as well. Could be hanging up on them, but that usually just takes a little bit of a jiggle to get them to line up. The drive shaft splines are already greased before I brought the lower unit over here. So I'm just running this one bolt up all the way finger tight, but enough to hold the lower unit in position so it doesn't slide out, and I don't have to line anything up again. Put the rest of our bolts back in. Again, this motor is getting a full service, and I'm trying to record all of it for you so that it'll be sort of like a big playlist. I think my intention is to put it all in here step by step so that you can work your way through it. This whole service should be done at least once a year. Most of our customers store their boats with us, so we kind of do it in two parts. We change the gear lube in the fall at the end of their season. That way, if there's any water in the gear case, we catch it right away and we reseal the drive while it's out over the winter. This customer here doesn't store with us. He actually uses his boat off and on through the winter. So, it just comes in for an annual service. You probably don't want to listen to that tapping. It comes in for an annual service once a year. We have a look at it. And we go through changing your gear oil, inspect the water pump impeller, change the water pump impeller. We grease the drive shaft spines, very important. We'll grease our propeller shaft splines here before we put the propeller back on. When I do that, I'm actually going to do that in a slightly separate video to talk about thrust washers as well. So, the other things that we do while it's being serviced is we grease our steering up here. There's a grease nipple on the side for the steering shaft. We see lots of them seized up if people don't lubricate them properly. So once a year they get grease pumped into them, especially in a saltwater boat. Corrosion's a big problem for them. I'll see if I can set the camera up to show you how much water comes out when we pump grease into them. These bolts, you want to have them nice and tight. They got a lock washer on them, and they're a fine thread. 10 mil, I think, maybe 12. 10 mil. So they can go good and tight. And don't forget this one that goes up underneath your trim tab zinc. Hard to get the fingers in there. It's a smaller bolt, 6 mil, so you don't want to go too tight with that. It's a coarse thread too. And our trim tab zinc. This one's in pretty nice shape. Again, We're going to put a bit of grease on those threads or we won't be able to get them apart in the future. So this trim tab has a little fin on it. That's to offset the propeller thrust for your steering. If you're using your boat, motoring along, and you find that it turns one way easier than the other, you can adjust this, offset it a little bit one way or the other way. Let's bring the camera around the back and I'll show you. There we go. So you can offset this a little bit to act like a rudder, and that will, if you're steering, that's I got to think about this to make it work. If it's hard to turn to the right, you can turn that a little bit. If it's harder to turn to the right, you can turn that to the right a little bit, probably about that much to start, and that will actually make it lighter to turn to the right and a little bit heavier to turn to the left. So that'll balance out your steering. If your boat's always pulling to the left or to the right, you can adjust this. You don't want to turn it too far. You don't want to turn it like that. It shouldn't need that much, but you know, about 1/4 of an inch off of dead center is a good starting point to trim your steering and give you even steering to port and starboard. A lot of people aren't familiar with that, so maybe I'll do a whole video on that. If you want to learn more about that, drop a comment. And if you want to learn about anything else, drop a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see more of. I'd love to hear about it. So that's it. Our lower unit is connected except for the pitot tube here needs to be connected. And it's pretty simple just to push on there like that. I'll zap that up with a cable tie to seal it up. I'm going to do a separate video on the propeller here very shortly.